Hi, everyone, and welcome to Code of Conduct, which is the backend engineering podcast by engineers and for engineers. I am joined today by Jake Faris, who
Hey,
is currently a software engineer at Datadog. So, hi, Jake. Thanks for joining us.
hey, how's it going?
I'm good. I'm excited.
Thanks for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
Now, obviously, we've had the pleasure of talking, but for our listeners who don't know you, could you tell us a little bit about you and where you're working and I guess how you got started?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm currently a software engineer at Datadog, which is a cloud monitoring as a service platform. But I've had a couple different jobs throughout my career. But originally, I studied computer science in college. It kind of happened sort of by chance. I took like a computer science class as an elective, and just like it totally clicked with my brain. It was a way of thinking that I had never really experienced before. And so, after that one class, I just sort of rolled with it and switched my major to computer science. And um, shortly after graduating, a couple of years back, did a coding boot camp actually. So I was able to do the Flatiron School after undergrad. After which I joined a company in New York, and I've been in New York ever since, hopping jobs every couple of years.
Yeah, sounds like most engineers that I know. And obviously, I mean, New York, you've got plenty to choose from. I think everybody and their cat are hiring software engineers.
Right, definitely. And it's funny because I feel like when I talk to people, my friends that don't work in tech, they're always like, you like job hopped every like year and a half. Like that's so short. They're like I don't know, for some reason, I feel like there's such an appeal of like the next thing that it happens more frequently than it should. I try to stick to, like, for me, the sweet spot is 2 years at a company, and then I'm like, I did my time, so to speak. But obviously things happen.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really interesting point because, you know, growing up, I was always told like you have to stay at a company for a minimum of 1 year, otherwise it's terrible. But as an engineer, your innate sort of desire is to continue learning. And sometimes you max out that learning potential at one company, or sometimes cultures aren't right, or sometimes just an amazing opportunity gets presented your way, like it quite frequently does. So it's interesting, obviously, that you've had that experience and you have to kind of explain to your friends or your family, like, I'm not crazy and there's nothing wrong with me. I'm just developing myself. But it is something that's definitely unique. I think the last time I checked, the industry average for software engineers in New York was 9 months to stay.
That's it. That is so short. That's wild to me. I mean, I did work at a job for 9 months, but only because I was fired. But that's we could talk about that later on. But for me, like the ideal time, you're right. Like at a certain point, like you've learned the technology, and unless a company has a really is really invested in making sure that they retain their talent and provide growth opportunities for them, like you're gonna get that better job title, that bump in the salary by job hopping. And unfortunately, that's the way it is, or fortunately, it depends on how you look at it.
Yeah, and you've given our listeners a great sneak preview into what's coming. So that's like a little bit of like clickbait or like whatever,
Right. Stay tuned.
our Daily Mail headline, like Jake was fired.
Oh my God, can you believe it? And I live to
um,
tell the tale.
So there are a few bits that I want to unpack there. So I'm interested because you studied a computer science degree, clicked with you, loved it. That's great. Now, most engineers at that point would, you know, get a job at where they interned or apply for jobs, but you decided to study at a boot camp. So you've had an education kind of across both platforms. Like, what was it that made you decide to do a boot camp after your degree?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I definitely get asked that a lot from like coworkers and people in tech. They're like, "Why would you do both?" And I think, they really offer two different approaches to software engineering. I use the term software engineering because I'm not saying it's about programming or computer science, because software engineering is a combination of both, right? So with the degree, it's a little more traditional, like algorithms, computer science stuff. But, at the end of it, I was like coding in these like kind of like random languages. Like I was using MATLAB and like stuff like that. And, you know, there was a point in time when, someone was like, oh, can you make an app, blah, blah, blah. Like as a software engineer, I don't know, but random people always ask me like, oh, could you make me an app that does this or whatever? But, but, you know, at that time, like I was like, I can't, like, I don't know where to start. I don't have the like, I could tell you, oh, maybe if we wanted to build it, it could theoretically look like this. But if you put me in front of a computer, I wouldn't know where to start
Wow.
at that time, right? I didn't know maybe the languages they use, what's the current like hot technology for the modern, web stack, so to speak. And so boot camps, I think they really approach it from a different angle. The goal of the boot camp is to get you coding and to get you to have an application or two or three by the end, like up live on the internet by the end of the boot camp. So, they want you to be able to say, hey, recruiter, look at my resume, look at this app that I built. It's like, this is, I have tangible real world skills, which is not always what they, want the goal of undergraduate degrees, in my experience.
Yeah, and that's interesting because when I first started, so I didn't do tech recruitment my entire career. And when I first started, I'll be honest, and I've changed my view, but the more clients that I spoke to, the more businesses in New York that I spoke to, I ended up with this huge prejudice against bootcamp grads. I did. The stigma was, if they're from a boot camp, it's a lesser quality education. Now, obviously, I've learned a lot, and thank God, and have been able to educate subsequently. But I'm interested because obviously I've learned, but you experienced that you got some great things out of your computer science degree, but you really bolstered your education, your experience in that. Now, when you came into the interviewing world, so you left college and you completed your boot camp, what was your experience of interviewing like, and which of the two, I guess, experiences did you leverage more when you were interviewing?
Great question. So, when I was in college, like junior year, I was definitely applying to like the big top companies, and, made it pretty far at a couple of them, and they're very algorithm based. It's like, okay, here's, do this with a hash, do this with a linked list, all of that stuff, which, is the skills that they teach you, right? They want you to be able to answer those questions. That's sort of what, in a way, the theory that they teach you at undergrad is for those big schools. But, not, I think there are plenty of companies that are looking for tech jobs that are not just those big FANG types. I mean, in 2021, every company is a tech company. Every company needs that. And they don't necessarily need you to be able to like reverse engineer like a linked list or whatever. They have a series of APIs or services of products that they pay for, and they need to build some website that allows them to put it all together. I think that's, in my experience, working at some companies that aren't necessarily tech companies first, that's what a lot of the work is like, hey, we've got all of these different services and stuff that the sales team is putting together with the IT team, and all of these different things, and how can we create a product that works for us internally, for example. And so at companies like that, the boot camps really came in handy because the interviews were much more, tangible. Can you really create something? And I think, a really good example of an interview, I look back at this, and it was maybe my favorite interview process that I've ever had. It was at this little startup, that it was a telephony company. So for those who don't know, it's like basically a phone service, as a service, software as a service for phones. And so the project that they gave me was sort of a take home, and they said, okay, use the Twilio API to create a little phone menu that I can physically call, and like there's a menu, press 1 to do this, press 2 to do this. And so code that up, commit it on GitHub, and then come in and we'll talk it out and talk out your thought process. So I thought that was a really realistic interview process for what an actual engineering job could be. You know, because not every day you're doing like some fancy algorithm thing. No, like you have to make it happen. You have to move those cards that you've been assigned from start to done. And oftentimes it's about reading API documentation and making it happen. And that sort of hustle and bustle, I think the bootcamp really gives you that sort of drive, because there's not necessarily, you know, a traditional grading system there. So there's not like, it's not about passing a test, it's about making something happen. And I think with the bootcamp, that's the angle that they're going for.
Okay. Now you said something there which I'm really interested in. So this startup that you interviewed with, that you enjoyed the experience of interviewing with them, was that early on in your career? Was that before you'd had a job?
That was a little later on.
Okay.
To be honest, yeah, that was about 2 or 3 years into my professional career.
Okay, interesting. Now, the reason I ask that is, and I don't know the answer, so this is kind of rhetorical, kind of loaded, but
sure.
There doesn't seem to be any like harmonious consensus amongst engineers, but some people hate, you know, live paired programming interviews. It's stressful, it's an alien environment, like you've got all of these pairs of eyes watching you. Some people really don't like computer science, but one thing that I see a lot of content on LinkedIn about is how can a company expect an engineer to complete a take-home assignment when, you know, we're working full-time jobs, we're interviewing at multiple companies, and I'm gonna like go home and or work on the weekend and spend, you know, 2 hours or 2 days on this thing. Like, what are your like genuine thoughts on that?
So personally, I don't mind a live coding interview, because I feel like the biggest problem with live coding interviews from an interviewee standpoint is not being able to admit what you don't know. For me, like the worst part is someone expecting you to know how to do something, or maybe use a library that you've never used before, and for you to not be able to say, I don't know this, and you know, work with the interviewer to move you forward, right? Because they want to hire you, and interviewers want to hire you. Like they don't want to do endless rounds of interviews to find the right person. Like they want it to be you, so they want to help. But you know what I found, especially with people newer to the programming industry, like people fresh out of college or boot camp, is that is a harder thing to say, right? Because you want to show off that you are smart and that you're knowledgeable, right? But I can think of a couple people that I know, myself included, who have maybe like not been very specific about the language that they wanted to use or the library. For example, saying, you know, a bootcamp grad, I know who's said that he was interested in doing a coding interview in JavaScript, and they gave him a Node challenge, which he wasn't familiar with, right? Which it's technically JavaScript, but the JavaScript domain is so big, right? So it's like, even before the process, how do you make sure that the interview is going to go well from both sides, for yourself as well? But that is a little tangential. I don't quite remember what your original question was.
No, I think that's a really good point. Like, I think, you know, not a lot of people do share the same mentality of an interview isn't to trip you up. It's not
right.
to look for reasons not to hire you.
Totally.
You know, the ideal is that this is a matching exercise. Think of it like a date. You know, we're looking to find out a little bit more about each other. And if the connection's there, like, great, let's
hit it. Do round two. Let's get married. That's it.
Or whatever floats your boat. Let's build a life together and live off the grid, whatever. But yeah, not a lot of people have that. And I think to hear that, for a lot of engineers, irrespective of level, being specific about what you know is such good advice. A director of data science that I once worked with at a well-known social media app said to me, one of the most important things that she screens for when hiring engineers is being aware of what they know really well, but knowing what they don't know even better.
Absolutely. That
Because
makes
that's
sense to me.
a job, right? Like,
Right. And no one expects you to know everything. Like when you join a company, in my experience, oftentimes it takes a month or two to get onboarded. People that like warm up time is built into the onboarding experience.
mhm.
Nobody expects you to be able to know not only maybe Go or whatever specific language that you use, but the specific ecosystem of that company. Like there's going to be random stuff that you've never heard of, and you're not expected to know it, but it's about being able to know your boundaries and how well you can learn, how quickly you can learn something, and also being able to be aware of what you know and what you don't know, I guess.
And you can speak to that because I know when we first got introduced, one of the things that I was really interested in was your, I guess, vast experience in terms of languages. So, this might ruffle a few feathers, but your
Uh-oh.
background was in Ruby, and I made a comment that said, from my experience, and I'm not an engineer, so apologies to anyone who loves Ruby, but my interpretation is it's not that sexy, not that many people want to work with it anymore. And you're now working with Go, which is an entirely different ecosystem. So I'd love to understand, first of all, how that journey's been for you, how you didn't become overwhelmed by what you don't know and learning something new, and also how you think you were equipped to, I guess, deal with that technical challenge.
Sure, definitely. So, you know, right off the bat, maybe controversially, I will say that I really, really enjoy Ruby and Ruby on Rails. And you're right, it is not that sexy in 2021. But I think that the reason that it's not sexy is because it's been fleshed out completely. And what I mean by that is, with Go or maybe some other languages, there's a lot of iteration and it's sort of on the cutting edge sometimes, right? So there's a lot of cool new stuff happening, but at the same time, like you'll bump into issues with external libraries, like third-party libraries that, maybe there's a bug in their code that you have no control over. And obviously that happens everywhere. That definitely happens in Rails too. But because the language is or the ecosystem is so mature, you know, the bugs that you might be experiencing in Go have been solved in a different in Ruby on Rails.
Hmm.
And that makes it boring. Like there's nothing challenging about a language that or a Ruby on Rails is not a language. Ruby is the language. Rails is the like ecosystem around it. But just to clarify, I know people are going to nitpick, but there's nothing exciting about working necessarily with a ecosystem where the majority of the problems have already been solved.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I can see why people say, "Oh, that's lame. Like, who wants to do Rails in this day and age?" But if your goal is to quickly move on a product, you want to build a proof of concept for something, the the tools you have are already there.
Mm.
Now that doesn't mean you can't do it in other languages.
Mhm.
Certainly not. I mean, different languages have their strengths, but I've always had a soft spot for Ruby on Rails. So that's all I will say on that.
So
But as
listen,
far as
I'm all for it. I think the Ruby community are screaming, "We love Jake" right now because there are
great,
a number of businesses that I work with that do use Ruby on Rails or have historically used Ruby on Rails, and they defend their choices and defend it incredibly well. And I've placed engineers that work with Ruby because it's fit for purpose, and that's the mark of a true
totally.
polyglot, right? Is I use the language which is fit for purpose. I'm not so biased to one specific language or technology that everything else doesn't matter. So no, I appreciate that. And so do the rest of the Ruby community. But we're working
Cool.
with Go
Shout
now.
out to them. Right. Yeah. Go, which is cool. It's totally different. And there's, you know, at what I had just said is that it's not necessarily Ruby on Rails is not necessarily doesn't come with the most daily challenges. With Go, I feel like you know, there isn't as much help. You don't get as much help with Go as Ruby on Rails. So really, you have to start thinking about some of those algorithms and some of that really computer sciencey stuff a little more. You know, thinking about in Go, there's interfaces, how, you know, using interfaces all the time to create abstractions so that you can build tests um, around your system. With Rails, you can stub any method anytime, and like so as a result, you don't have to always think about, you know, how elegant is my code. With
Mm,
Go, you definitely have to think about does this interface make sense? Is it generic enough that I can test it easily, like using dependency injection or whatever.
mhm.
Um, so yeah, I think there's a little more of a fun, it's a little more of a fun challenge to use Go. So I definitely appreciate that.
Okay. And would you say that your kind of boot camp background like set you up for the world of Ruby, and your computer science education kind of helped you leap into Go?
Using the boot camp was really helpful because I think what it taught me is a lot of, you know, this thing is broken, go make it work.
Mm,
And I think in both Ruby on Rails and Go, um, that and all programming languages, the natural state of code is broken. Like usually your code is broken, and it's up to you to make it work and make it work correctly. Um, at least while it's in development, not production, of course. But you know, I think yeah, I think the concepts that you study, you know, in school, like um, I'm forgetting the official name because it's been so long, but you know, using classes abstraction with classes in Ruby and maybe interfaces in Go, you know, I think there's this some of these concepts can be used across the board in program in any language.
yeah. I mean, I think it's really great to see, like, it's nice to, one thing I mentioned to you is it's nice to see that, you know, uh there's no right or wrong education. There's no right or wrong way to enter this industry, and there's no one route which dictates what you have to do for the remainder of your career. And I think you are, you know, the absolute poster child for you can be anything and do anything you want. Just keep challenging yourself. And I think, you know, throughout your academic career and now your professional career, like, you're a testament to that. And you're now working at an incredibly well-respected technology. Well, I know you said that all businesses are tech businesses now, but Datadog are obviously very well.
Datadog, yeah, I would say Datadog is the first like tech company that I've worked at, full stop. So definitely sometimes a culture shock in that sense.
Yeah. Now, we sort of, well, when I say we, I mean you teased about it earlier, but we were talking about interviews, talking about this kind of misconception of, you know, you have to stay at a company for a year, you can't job hop, you can job hop. And you have some personal experience about leaving a job and maybe unexpectedly surprise to all of our
Sure.
listeners who won't know what's coming next.
Yeah.
um, but that can sometimes be difficult to talk about in interviews. So can you just kind of expand on that a little bit, if you don't mind?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, leaving a job for me has always been hard. Even when it was totally amicable, like the first two jobs that I work at, this is a little embarrassing, but like I did cry when I told my manager that I was quitting. Like that's so lame. But like it was because I was just very, you know, I had a really good experience at those places. I think that I can definitely count my blessings for that. But it's never a fun feeling for a
Mhm.
variety of reasons. But yeah, so um after a job that I had been at for a little over 2 years, I was really ready for something new. I interviewed at this startup, the one I had actually mentioned that gave me that great interview. So at the start, I was having really great vibes. Everything was really awesome, and I was hired to work on this project. They wanted to build another like a brand new version of one of their public APIs, bring it up to sort of a modern speed because it had sort of been built ad hoc over the years, and they wanted to like start top down and give it like a really high quality design. And so that was something that I had been tasked to work on. And I was, in many meetings right when I joined to sort of figure that out and build a plan for that. But the project had unfortunately was continuing to be postponed. And then um, eventually there was some C-suite changes. So they got a new CTO and they had to, we had to wait until the CTO was up to speed before we started this project. And then eventually the CTO canned the project, which was a bummer. But as a result, I didn't really have much of a purpose at this place. So they sort of cut me, which is fine. It wasn't a performance issue or anything. This happens, structural changes and those sorts of things. So, but it still was a bummer. I worked at this place for 9 months. And at the end of the day, I didn't really have that much on my resume to like point to. I was productive. I was working. Don't get me wrong. I wasn't just like messing around waiting for them to give me the green light. But yeah, I did. It was such a bummer to not be able to have that this like public API thing that I was supposed to work on under my belt, because I was really excited about it.
Well, that's a huge thing, and I'm grateful for you sharing that. I mean, being let go was like, no matter what the circumstances are, like it's never going to feel nice, it's never going to feel fair, and I think to add to that, you had joined this company under the pretense of what could be and
Correct.
what it was going to mean for you, and you actually bring me on to a question that I was thinking, oh my god, what about this, is so many interviews, they care about what you've done, what you've built, what did you contribute, not just a list of things that you like did, like pulled tickets, right? It's like, what did you achieve? And so you kind of had this really difficult situation to navigate when you were interviewing after being let go of, okay, first of all, I was let go, which sounds like a bad thing, but it's not a bad thing. It's just circumstantial, and I have to navigate that. But second of all, what do I talk about for this last 9 months? How did you, two questions. First of all, was there anyone that you lent on in terms of advice, or any, videos or books or anything like that that you lent on for how to navigate that? And second of all, what was your real life experience? Like, give us everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Sure. Yeah. So, I ultimately, it was a tough week or two right afterwards, not gonna lie. But they had given me a couple weeks pay to make it work. So I just hit the ground running. I was like, I got nothing to do. Like, I'm just gonna apply to places and see. And I had a few hits. But actually I hit up an old recruiter who had interviewed me actually for Datadog a couple years ago. I made it to the very final interview, and ultimately they decided not to give me an offer, which I was bummed about. But I had really had a good experience, 3 years ago or whatever this was. So I ended up staying in touch with the recruiter who worked there, and during this time, then Datadog came across my plate, like as a place to apply from one of these job search sites and all that. And I was like, wait, I know a recruiter there. Like, we had a good time chatting. Maybe I'll just hit him up directly. And I hit him up, and he basically was like, something's weird. Like, this, like, it's only been 9 months and I don't understand. So let's have a talk. Let's have a chat. And I explained the situation, about how this project didn't quite pan out. And as a result of that, I was sort of able to kind of speed round through Datadog's interviewing process again, because I had already done it and they already had a record of me and my technical skills. So fortunately, I went in to talk maybe for half a day with a couple of hiring managers and talk about my experience and explain that, yeah, I didn't have this proof of like this public API under my belt, but I can talk about what I was going to do. I can talk about the issues that the old API had and why the new solution would work. And I think that was a really important part of that interview process, is explaining, you know, what we were going to do, even though
Mm,
it didn't come to fruition. I think a lot of the time, from what I've seen, the more senior engineers that I know they code a little less on the job and they spend more time planning, right?
mm.
And as I'm slowly working up to hitting that senior engineer title, which will happen, let's check back in a little bit. I promise it'll happen. But
Manifest it.
absolutely, yes. Um, but yeah, I think being able to say, okay, we have this huge problem, this very important public API that people consume, and there's flaws. And what are the flaws, and why can you make a case for why your proposed solution is best? And I
Mm,
think that's what some companies are interested in seeing, is people who can make decisions, right? It's one thing to be, early on in your career and, take whatever Jira tickets, your product manager gives you and be able to execute them, right? That's an important part of like climbing the ladder, is being able to show that you have that skill and that prowess to get it done. But ultimately, someone is writing those Jira cards, and there's technical input for that. And I think the more senior you are, the more it becomes about decision making and being able to think about, okay, should we use Ruby or should we use Go,
mm.
and why? And not being able to say, oh, it's trendy, or oh, it's cutting edge, but be able to say, okay, these are the pros, these are the great things about this language, and these are the trade-offs that we would make. Is it worth it for us to do that? Stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And again, not something that, it goes back to your earlier point where it's like it's okay to not know everything. Like you don't need to know everything. Like the likelihood is your hiring manager doesn't know
Right.
everything. And if they do, send them my number. I want to talk.
Right.
Um,
Exactly.
but I think, being able, it's a very mature, commercially savvy head that you have on your shoulders to have gone through, what's really taboo, not just in software and engineering, but in the world of work. Like, to you feel like something's wrong with you if you get let go.
Absolutely.
And we're in 2021, like the economy, the industry, the people of America, the people of the globe are still reeling from the repercussions of the pandemic, where so many brilliant people were let go. So many people have changed their LinkedIn icons to open to work. And, some of them are people who, I mean, Airbnb, prime example, let a ton of brilliant people go. And I saw a ton of posts that were heartbreaking about people looking for work, and it can cause this huge inferiority complex of what will my family think, like how will I explain this to my friends, my partner, like my future boss. And for you to have been able to kind of have that for maybe a week or two and feel those feelings because they're real and they're valid and everybody's feeling them, but to put that into practice and say, I'm going to try something that I failed at once before. Again, when I'm at my most vulnerable, I'm going to go again, because what's the worst that can happen? That's a real like David and Goliath story right there.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, you're right. It is a scary time to think you have the next 6 months to a year planned out, and then that to be swept right under you, and for that to be swept right under you. But ultimately, um, I think that software engineering a lot of the time is about relationships. It's about finding people that you like to work with, who can also do the work, of course. But nobody wants to work with that guy, or that person who just like is not friendly, and who is
The brilliant jerk, I call them.
thank you, yes, yeah, that the brilliant jerks, right? but ultimately, if you can if you can explain your situation and say, hey, I have the drive, I have ideas, and maybe I had a bump or two, but I show promise and I deserve a chance, I think a lot of people will take that chance on
Mm,
you. You know, earlier, as I said earlier, recruiters want to hire you. Like everybody wins when you get a job. They get to stop interviewing. Like everybody wins. So I think that most people are willing to listen, um, if you can get your foot in that door.
yeah, I think I've not heard that before, and maybe I'll look back when I see it on the recording. But I think my eyes went really wide when you said software engineering is about relationships, and I
100%. I believe that to my core.
I'm so intrigued by this. This is a really fresh perspective that I haven't heard before because it's not typically known for that.
Okay, yeah, no, you're right. That's the thing, is it's not typically known for that, but I think that the places that I've seen have the most success
Mm-hmm.
do prioritize those relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean, oh, everybody has to go to happy hour on Thursday. Like it's really because so much of the time you're sending your pull requests to coworkers. Maybe they're busy. Maybe as Did you write a nice description in the pull request? Did you provide testing examples? Is there a new you have like some tooling and that you added some new feature? Did you document it? Um, you know, there's a component of sharing knowledge with
Mm-hmm.
your coworkers that makes a team better. You know, the
Mm-hmm.
brilliant jerks don't share their knowledge and nobody knows what they're ever doing and it's a mystery. But when you have a team that can divide and conquer work together, I think that makes them much stronger.
I love that. Like, this sounds so stupid because I'm a recruiter and I've been doing this for 7 years, and the word culture is like part of like my everyday vocabulary. But when you think of culture, or at least when I think of culture, I think, how does the office look, feel, sound? Like, how do people play with one another in the playground? You don't necessarily always associate how that correlates to how somebody works with one another, and not just how much enjoyment they get out of it, but the end goal for the company. Like, how much more productive is somebody when the knowledge is so shared? And how does that knowledge become shared? Is because we've got a harmonious environment. And how do we have that? Through relationships, through being kind, being transparent, being honest and direct, what you do know, what you don't know, where you can and can't support. And wow, I'm like, surely like the
Totally.
lights have come on.
That's it. That's my take. And I'm still learning how to do it. One thing that I'm not that great at, if I'm going to be honest with you, is keeping track of my work and making sure that it's updated in like Jira or my card tracker. I'm always forgetting to like move the card or update the description. And I have a coworker now who's so good at that I feel insecure a little bit. I'm like, okay, like if she's doing it, then I have to put my work up here. And so it motivates me to be better. And I think that everybody benefits. You know, I can share if I'm having a problem with it, if there's a document, I can show it to my manager and say, hey, I'm having this systemic issue. Can you help me? And
Mm,
then they'll have like a paper trail, right? And that can be spread around. So I
mm.
think, you know, no, you're not a software engineering does not happen in a bubble. Like you need people to make it work successfully. And so as long as you put the effort in to make sure everybody works smoothly together, you don't all have to like each other. Like, listen, it's not just, we're not going around playing duck, duck, goose. Like it's, of course, there's like personal relationships that come into play. But as long as everyone is willing to make the machine run smoothly, then it will.
I love that. And I think it's so important in a almost fully remote world right now. Like, um, I think if you kind of closed your eyes and asked people who weren't in the industry to picture a software engineer, they would picture somebody in a hoodie with their hood up, and their headphones in and not interested in collaborating. And I think, you know, the more conversations that get had like this, the more those barriers get broken down. And also the more you encourage that collaboration, like, doesn't matter whether you're on Slack, whether you're on Zoom, whether it's your Jira tickets, like, it's not just nice to be nice, it's actually super productive to be nice and to be communicative.
Totally. I 100% agree.
I love the like bell ringing, like, amen.
Yes.
Well, I want to say, first of all, like, thank you for being so candid, and sharing, that you were let go. Like I said, I think there will be a lot of people who were either affected by something because of the pandemic, or because they joined a business that the culture wasn't right, or whatever it may be, and have experienced that and probably never knew how to say it ever. And you own it. And so thank you for that. So I just want to, with that in mind, just finish on, you know, what advice you would maybe give to someone who is struggling to navigate how they market themselves, how they market their experience, for maybe when it might be a little unorthodox, or their previous role ended up being like a little bit less than ideal.
Yeah, of course. So happy to talk about that experience, and thanks for having me on here. But yeah, so my advice to someone who might not, my advice to someone who is looking for more guidance on how to market themselves is that there's always a positive spin. If this is if you were working in a different industry and you did a boot camp and this is your first job, like, what did working in that industry give you, empower you, that makes you unique as a software engineer, right? Like, maybe you didn't spend 4 years getting a traditional degree, but what did this other degree, or how did you spend that time that helped you become the person that you are today, giving you the critical thinking skills or the communication skills or what have you, that can empower you to do the job of a software engineer. That would be my advice. I mean, I think that it's easy to say, oh shoot, I spend 9 months on a project that never happened and I have nothing to show for it. I understand that feeling. I understand that it's maybe hard in moments to break free from, but there is always something that you can spin. So just continue to think about it, and I'm sure you'll find it.
Well, Jake, I'm inspired. I'm like,
I don't know, what am I talking about?
Who can I go and talk to about my experience? I love it. No, I think, you know, all you can be is your complete authentic self. And if it's not right for a company, that's okay. You know, I think the onus isn't always on us as individuals and not being good enough. Sometimes it's about a good match. And I think, you know, to be completely you and to be able to spin it and say, look, this is what I can do, this is what I can't do, and this is what I did learn, but this is the opportunity that I missed out on. What can you offer me? You know, that's so raw and so real. And if a company doesn't like it, it's probably a good thing. So yeah, I mean, I'm manifesting your senior engineer promotion. We want to make sure that all of our listeners are manifesting that for you too. Maybe we'll check in once you get promoted, and we'll talk about the intricacies of what that look like.
For sure, that would be fun.
But thank you so much for coming on. I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks for having me. I had a great time.